Gathered friends, listen again to our tale of really, really old fan fiction. So, Curtis and the others are not here. I am recording this separately as an epilogue to Book 10 because none of this is really canon, but I wanted to show it off anyways because it's also really, really good, and I've been singing this story's praises for several years now. Literally, it's been that long. So, story time within the story time here. Once upon a time, there was a little organization that a friend of mine ran called Solis Magna. Our goal was to make basically sets of things that hadn't been really produced by LEGO and also continue the story of the series in a way. And the first faction was the first one to bottom out. And then, to make the matters worse, our writer just had life to deal with and he had to quit. And he left a lot of unfinished story material behind. Later on, he would go on to give me basically sort of a design document full of notes of sorts for what he intended to do with the rest of the story, and a few tidbits of the work he did actually finish. After which point, I would end up getting Reese from Lightstone, who is you may currently know for doing all of the writing for the Turaga and literally all the new dialogue in The Legend of Matanui Rebuilt. I would get him onto the team to continue where our previous writer left off. So a lot of that has been in progress for the first time in 6 or 7 years, give or take now. And as hinted at before, this is meant to be a continuation of Book 10, or the serials that Greg never finished on BionicleStory.com. So, since it's not really canon, and it's not required reading by anyone on the Gathered Friends team, I decided to just do an epilogue episode to do a bit of a read-along, and you guys can judge for yourselves what you think of it and how good it may be. So I'm going to start with The Powers That Be, Chapter 5, which was written entirely by our previous writer, I believe. I'm getting my Google Docs mixed up here, but these have been on here for so long. And then I'll be moving on to the Yesterday Quest, Chapter 4, with bits and pieces of Chapter 5 and 6 that have not yet entirely been completed, and those have been written by Reese. So, listen again to our legend of the Bionicle. Mavra, Kopaka repeated skeptically, looking at what could only be an illusion or a phantom. Vakama had illustrated in his tales during their immigration from Metru Nui the details of their encounter with the rogue Matoran. Mavra was killed by his own pets, the white-armored Toanuva continued, a subtle chill running through him as the clues began tumbling into place. The impossibility of encountering dead Matoran up on the Red Star, the figures waiting just outside normal vision, and Garduk's increasingly sensible reluctance to remain. There were only a few answers, but before he could voice them himself, he was cut off. "Killed or not, you can't just wait here or they'll catch you," Mavra snapped, stepping forward defiantly as if to prove his being alive. Pohatu looked at Kopaka, easily as disturbed as the toe of ice. There was no question that, of all places, outer space was no place for someone like Mavra to resurface, but he was possibly their only way to navigate this labyrinth without their teleporting guide. "He's right. We need to find a way out," he suggested, his upbeat tone pushing away the uncertainty of their surroundings. The Onumatoran smiled, his stance composed now that he'd assumed he'd earned their trust. "There's a teleporter further in, but it's been broken for a while. You're Toa, you'll figure it out," he offered a smile. "You always do." Pohatu shrugged off the eerie feeling he continued to get, the growing urgency to move making the decision for him. "We'll take a look at it. After we track down whoever took out Karzani and Tren Krom," Mavra gaped, his untimely demise leaving him unaware of the fact all those legends of the tyrant were true, and reduced to mere legend in a matter of moments. Kopaka nodded, though what he had just seen made him hesitant to speak. Still, it wouldn't help either of them if Pohatu simply blasted his way through the way he always did. So with some caution he looked at Mavra, then Pohatu, flatly saying, "I saw Matoran out there, dozens of them." This revelation dropped an eerie silence over the whole room, one that Mavra would eventually break. "There are some Toa, too. They're the ones you want to watch out for. By now, the explosion should have taken out those annoyances, the determined figure thought. It would pose problems if relics from an outdated age managed to catch up to him before his plans were complete. Without that gelatinous dictator and mad tyrant, it would be a series of small steps toward realizing his goal. After all, he was looking towards the symbol of his own impending victory, the spirit's wish. With all the mental clarity of a being willing to destroy and recreate the entire world, the lone mastermind stepped under the arch and felt himself land directly in the heart of the Red Star. Even if Pohatu had 100 years, it would be too soon to cope with what he just heard. Toa, Matoran, and countless monsters not even of this world running loose on the Red Star. Just what was this place, he wondered. As the pair of Toa followed the long-dead Matoran through a series of hidden hallways and abandoned factory-like rooms, he nudged Kopaka's arm and whispered, "Just to be sure, you aren't pulling an elaborate joke, right? Since when were there Toa on the Red Star?" Kopaka could only shake his head, both in annoyance and disbelief that everything they'd seen was actually happening. "Actually, I was pretty surprised when I got here, too," Mavra said expertly, as if he knew exactly what the two were thinking. "But now you're used to it, I bet," Pohatu replied. "As a matter of fact, yes. As long as you stay away from them, they're harmless. The real struggle has been continuing my research." "Research?" Mavra stopped quickly after that, just as they entered a long, poorly lit corridor, the sensation of being surrounded finally behind them. But it wasn't due to safety that the Onomatoran chose to hold, but it was because of what was at his feet. He looked down and watched as a long snake slithered by. Unlike the Rahi Pohatu had seen in his time, this one was different. It possessed shining scales that reflected the dim light back brilliantly, casting patches of light along the ground and making it difficult to see the snake's true size. Only once it passed did Mavra continue, though he seemed lost in his own world, whispering to himself. "Far different from Terakava, it must use that for camouflage. I wonder which planet it came from. Maybe I should examine it more closely." It was as if the Toa were being completely ignored. Only when Pohatu cleared his throat did Mavra seem to recover his awareness, still stepping forward confidently. "To think they would lock my friends up in some sterile lab and not give them the chance to show how beautiful they really are," the scientist mused bitterly. "They? You mean the Castora?" Kopaka questioned, increasingly concerned by Mavra's calm demeanor even in this nightmarish place. "Yes, they're assigned over all the samples and controls for the teleporter, but now they're just interfering with my project. They can't see the value of these creatures either." And so they continued walking, both Toa burdened with more questions than answers. Yet Pohatu was starting to grow aware of their guide's chilling truth. Mavra was the same as what he'd been told, an obsessed Rahi lover. It may not have had the same splendor as Artaka's original island, but Gali nonetheless felt the weight of its leader as she stepped deeper into the camp. Thousands of tools and Matoran to use them were strewn on the laboring region. In attempting to recreate the wonder of paradise that they once lived in, Gali could only glance at their fervent efforts as she passed through, headed straight for the imposing structure she'd been invited to by her own maker, Artaka himself. Artaka, for all his pristine composure and authority, could not bear to look down on Gallinuva as she sternly returned his gaze. He would not desire to show cold indifference given the gravity of recent events. He had decided the moment she and her valiant team had become Toanuva many months ago to grant her what few could ever glean from this master of artistry and ingenuity. As reward for her efforts and penance for his own negligence, she will receive pity following the travesty she'd committed. Even with the connection to her past lost to time, Gallinuva still felt a shared bond with the legend who brought her into this world, even if she stands her ground and refuses to blindly accept his authority. Among all the Toanuva, only she could truly see herself as equal to such a powerful agent of Matanui, if not by rank, then by honor. But as the tension dragged on, even she felt a long-overdue message hang in Artaka's halls, and its chilling touch gripped her, slowly driving a wedge through her pride. This monster who has slain Tuyet and dedicated itself to ending your existence is a machine created by the great beings, Artaka solemnly explained, not once giving her pause for the pain her own reasoning might cause her. It's known as the Merendar, which in Agori dialect means salvation. Salvation from what? Gali asked in a mere whisper, the sting of his first comment dulled by the knowledge he presented. yet even she could harbor a guess at what it might mean. "From you and all of your kind," came the bitter answer. This next part of the chapter isn't done, so it just, says cut away to something else. As I said, this is not finished yet. What the Mirendar is meant to do is wipe out all Toa in case they invade Solis Magna, for it is not in your purpose to set foot on this planet, Artaka continued. He chose to ignore the distress in Galli's eyes as she willfully listened on, even if she must wade through such inner turmoil that her own hands shake. "But why? Our purpose is to the Matoran," she snapped back, her firm exterior cracking in a way that drew out a subtle sigh from Artaka, who replied, "The Matoran are bound to the Great Spirit, a dominion in which they would have stayed had the Makuta not interfered. But they were let out, and Toa followed. Now more Toa will die than ever, until none are left." The Toa of water steadily slowed her breathing until she brought back a sliver of calm, her meditation in years past lending her strength to handle such painful truths. Did the great beings truly not feel anything when they determined my brothers were to be seen as mere invaders? She asked, fear in her eyes and a quiver in her voice. "We'd always protected the Matoran, and we would never—" "And yet the great beings believed you might not always protect the Matoran, and that leaving Maranui made you a threat," Artaka counters, his patience waning the more she denied what he'd known for thousands of years. "Why you are here does not matter to the Mirendar. It only wishes to end you, and it will do so by attempting to seal away all of your elemental powers." This rung soundly in Galli's head. Nothing could ever erase the desperation she'd felt during her days on Matanui when the threat of the Borak hung like a foul cloud over the heads of those in Gakoro. How can this be? My Nuva symbol is still with the Matoran. It is then that Artaka nodded his head, now leaning her closer to the harsh reality of her state. "The symbol houses your powers, and also imprisons them. It is a branding given only to traitors, to Toa who betray Matanui. You have been an usurper since you first imprisoned the Barag, as well as the rest of the Toa I made." A physical slap would hurt less than what Galli felt just then. As a Toa Nuva, one who endured and overpowered the greatest of challenges presented to her, to be called a traitor is to have her role and her beliefs dashed and denied by the Great Spirit himself. She pleaded with Artaka, feeling the devastating vulnerability and loneliness only those with their will trampled feel. And yet he could not console her, for he did not feel sympathy, only regret that he had to acknowledge her crime. "When you imprisoned the Barag," he continued, silencing her with his unhindered voice, "you triggered a safeguard I installed long before the Toa Metru brought the Matoran to the surface. It is designed to react to any team of Toa who aggressively seal the Borak Queens, whom you at the time saw as servants of the Makuta." The steady rise and fall of Galli's emotions were visibly wearing on her, strength of character stripping away to unveil one who has always used honor and virtue to determine a path she had no certainty would lead to victory. Now, with both threatened, her entire past was called into question. Artaka gazed on, seeing a Toa of water unraveled. "But no matter the circumstance, what matters now is that you are already traitors, making you the greatest threat to the Mirendar. This machine is a perfected form of the cube I placed in the Borak hive, able to bind any Toa it comes in contact with and ensnare their powers within the branding. This causes the Toa to be unable to use their elemental powers, as you are very familiar. An agent of Matanui would see that brand as a sign of a renegade, and would likely imprison you or force you to fulfill the contract that comes with the symbol. The contract is whatever duty you are given upon receiving a symbol, such that you can retain your Toa power. In your case, you had to free the Barag, however the Mirendar is less forgiving. To fulfill the contract, the Toa he brands must die, but he cannot bind you while this exists." Artaka's eyes flickered for a mere moment, and before Galli's eyes, the ground rose up into an unceremonious pedestal, her Nuva symbol shimmering into existence on top of it, glowing with the power. Where once she'd looked favorably on it, now she felt nothing but contempt. But for what she cannot place. Her symbol? Herself? Artaka? Matanui? The great beings? Who is to blame for this twisted nature that causes her to feel revulsion for her very past and her role as a Toa? so transfixed is she with the awful tidings that she doesn't notice Artaka's intent until it's too late. With a deft motion, he swept up the symbol, and Galli's sovereignty over water itself was stolen away, her breath leaving as a pit formed inside her, a pit that was once filled with strength. She stumbled back, the shock of Artaka's clear theft having stunned her experienced mind. But even some memories are too strong to fade, and she knowingly flung out her willpower with the full ferocity she felt. Artaka noted the rush of power she offered him, threatening to overwhelm him, but he was no Borak Kal. He merely exerted a will that transcended the age of the Matoran universe itself. Such an embalming and dominant inner strength flowed through the symbol, and in that brief connection crashed into her like a wave at high tide, knocking her back. Now you understand. This is what despair for all Toa is, what the Merendar represents, Artaka exclaimed. But now, even as the Merendar is salvation for the Agori, this brand is your salvation from the Toa killer. He closed his eyes, and the symbol's possession once again fell to Galli, even when it remained in Artaka's hands. Her elemental powers rushed back into her, rejuvenating and restoring her with the healing that only soothing familiarity can bring. In relief, she lifted herself up and glanced at her creator, an inkling of just what he means having started to sink in. The Merendar must seal my power in a brand to overwhelm me, she stated carefully. That is true. So then if my power is already in a symbol, it cannot be removed. Then I and my brothers are free from this contract to die? And for the first time since she arrived, Gallinuva saw Artaka smile. So, as may have been a bit obvious, that was two different segments of what is meant to be the same part of the book, and there's no chapters set up to this yet. The powers that be, as Chapter 5 ends when Galli arrives on Artaka, probably something else was supposed to happen before the next bit, which is just labeled as Galli's crime in my notes. But I decided to currently just read the two together, since they are obviously meant to be part of the powers that be, both of them. So, as you can see, it's incomplete, but the concepts are there. Moving on now to the next part, which is the Yesterday Quest, chapters 4, 5, and part of 6. These are all in... Only chapter 4 is complete, from what I gather, but we're going to read it anyways, because I still want to get everyone's opinion on this. Charya watched as two of the Baramangnan Voroks crossed the nearby river, thankfully missing Gelu and Orde in a nearby tree. Unfortunately, a couple of them had also stayed behind to survey the area, or perhaps to capture their group had they tried to double back. Every time one of the Voroks passed by the brush Charya was hiding in, she attempted to channel her power into a lightning blast, but the energy never even made it to her fingertips. It felt so wrong to not have the use of her elemental powers. She couldn't imagine what the Toanuva must have felt when their powers had been stripped away, but this couldn't have been that different. She could still feel the electricity flowing through her, but it was just barely out of reach. Nevertheless, they couldn't just wait forever for the other two to come up with a cunning plan. She waited for the Voroks to pass by once again, then signaled to Zarya. At once, the two descended on the unsuspecting Voroks. Within a couple of moments, they managed to knock both of the Voroks out cold and restrain them up against a nearby tree using some sturdy vines. Charya looked the two unconscious Voroks over and found something interesting. On the center of their chests were two small, identical metal devices. As Charya reached towards them, she could feel the energy suppression getting stronger. She gripped it in her hand and tried to pull it off. It budged a small amount, but wouldn't come off. Suddenly, the Vorok's body began convulsing violently. Charya took a step back, preparing to fight the Voroks off, but it stopped moving rather quickly and showed no signs of having woken up. "What was that?" Zarya questioned, reaching out for the device attached to the other Voroks to inspect it. His eyes widened as he too undoubtedly felt the power change. He was careful, however, not to move the device any. Charya carefully moved closer to the device to inspect it and gasped. The device was not tied around the outer metal armor of the Voroks as she'd suspected. Instead, there was a layer of flesh encasing the sides of the device. Whoever had given Kabrua and his tribe this technology had surgically implanted it onto their bodies. They're stuck into their bodies, Charya noted incredulously. And judging by what happened just now, I'm guessing removing it is impossible without killing them, Zarya added. Charya stopped to think for a moment. An idea popped into her head. She motioned for Zarya to move aside, then started backing up. I'm going to test the range on these things, she explained. She took 10 steps back from the two Volroks and attempted another blast of electricity. Nothing. She took another 5 steps and tried again. Nothing. Another few paces. A small spark of electricity flared from her fingertips. Almost got it, she mumbled to herself. She held her hand out towards the device on the Volroks and focused all the energy she could muster while carefully pacing backwards. She took about another 10 steps back and then a flash of lightning shot out from her hand and collided with the power suppression device. A short zap of electricity fizzled out from it and a cacophonous crack emitted. Back where Charya had just been, Zarya reacted with surprise as he undoubtedly felt the energy return to his body somewhat. Charya smirked and aimed for the second device. Charya, hold on, Zarya started. Unfortunately for him, Charya had already loosed her second bolt at the Volroks' device. Another small explosion of sparks spat out of the small machine and a crack rang through the area. Charya, satisfied with her performance, sauntered back over to the unconscious Volroks. She expected praise for her dismantling of the devices, but instead she was met with a concerned look from Zarya. What? She asked incredulously. Did you not want your powers back? Do you realize how much noise you just made? He exclaimed, keeping his voice down as much as possible. What if the other Volroks heard and doubled back here? Just because we took these two by surprise doesn't mean it'll work with all of them. Charya's eyes widened. Quickly she looked back in the direction where Gaelu and Orde had been hiding. Sure enough, they were gone. She could only hope that they'd escaped due to her lack of forethought. We need to be careful, Zarya continued. He then glanced around the immediate area, searching for something. There, he exclaimed, pointing to a thick patch of overgrown grasses next to the river. We can lay low there for a moment to make sure they're not doubling back. Then we decide our next course of action from there. What about Orde? Charya asked, still looking around. Looks like the two of them already relocated. Zarya quickly glanced over to their former location, then thought for a moment. He was about to speak again, but Charya quickly interjected. It's probably safer to hide first. We can regroup when we're sure the Volroks have lost our scent. Zarya considered for a moment before nodding and starting forward to the banks of the river. Hiding in the grass wasn't the most comfortable thing, but that wasn't passing through Charya's mind while there. Her and Zarya had been lying low for about 2 minutes, and they'd seen hide nor hair of any Boromagnan Volroks. Charya was starting to get antsy, and it turned out that Zarya's worry was for nothing. Occasionally, she'd popped her head out to look around, but never saw anything but flora. The only thing worrying her was that Orde and Gaelu hadn't shown up anywhere either. She didn't know what would be worse, having to take on Kabrua's army of Volroks with just her and Zarya, or reporting back to Onuanuva with 2 dead comrades. The Volroks aren't coming back, Charya whispered, annoyed. We need to keep moving and find Orde and Gaelu. What if they're in danger? Zarya considered for a moment, then quickly peeked up above the brush. Fine, he sighed. When we get to the other side of the river, try to step lightly. We don't want them tracking us. Charya nodded, and the both of them stood up and headed into the river. Zarya led, making sure to eke out the shallowest parts of the riverbed before making strides forwards. Charya was constantly checking for the Volroks, not just with her eyes, but also by making sure her elemental powers were still working. One sign of the suppression, and suddenly there was a scream from somewhere in front of them. There! I can see them! Zarya immediately halted and entered a battle stance, Charya following suit. She scanned the area for whoever spotted them, a bolt of lightning at the ready. Whoever had spotted them wasn't close enough to stop her from readying a shot. She quickly shot her gaze around the immediate area, but spotted nothing. How well was this thing hiding? Crack! From ahead of them, the sound of a tree snapping resounded through the area. Charya, surprised, accidentally let out her lightning bolt into a nearby tree. Zarya hustled his way to the other side of the river to see what was going on. Charya did the same, but split off slightly just in case, taking cover about 50 feet away from Zarya. Cautiously, she peered around the corner. What she saw were Volroks, Kabrua included. They were circled around something, gnashing their fangs. She could hear them chatting excitedly amongst themselves, although of what they were speaking about she couldn't ascertain. Kabrua himself was holding something up in the air, however she was unable to see what it was. In fact, she couldn't see what they were gathered around either. The reason? Kabrua's small hunting party wasn't at all that small after all. There was an entire army of Boda Magnan Voroks standing in the clearing. Chapter 5. Gaelu was carefully considering what Orde had just described to him when he spotted something blue out of the corner of his eye. He glanced over to his right, only to see that Charya had leapt out from the hiding place onto an unsuspecting member of Kabrua's hunting party. The ambush was sloppy, with Gaelu getting a slight chuckle as Charya tackled one Voroks, only for the Voroks' elbow to smack her directly in the face. However, what little enjoyment he found in the situation was sucked away by Orde, staring off into the distance, over to where Kabrua's party had wandered. For all the standoffish behavior he displayed before their mission began, Orde now exuded a feeling of total seriousness. Gaelu couldn't quite imagine what could have possibly shocked the Toa so much as to make him like this. Briefly returning his attention to Charya, Gaelu noticed that she'd managed to tie two Voroks up to a nearby tree. Zarya had also come out of hiding, and the two of them were examining their catch. Charya was reaching for something on the Voroks that Gaelu couldn't see, but whatever it was made the Voroks jerk around in place. It briefly occurred to Gaelu that it may be important to pay attention to whatever those two were doing, but this thought was dashed immediately by Orde dropping down into the shallow riverbed beneath them. "What are you doing?" Gaelu whispered, caught off guard. "We need to follow them," Orde replied, an urgency in his voice. Gaelu dropped down from the branch as Orde began slowly making his way to the other side of the river. "Hold on," Gaelu called after him. "Just because you can read my mind doesn't mean I can read yours. The other Voroks can't be far away, and you want to just run right up to them." That's the end of Chapter 5 so far, I guess. Chapter 6. Just a footnote here. Chapter 6 thingy after the two groups meet up inside the Toa facility, and Orde explains Kabrua. "Who are you? How did you get here?" said the king of the Voroks. A small, unfamiliar being had presented itself in front of them. "I am a friend." "That's not an answer. Tell me now, strange creature, or I'll— Be quiet! I have information that you require." The king of the Voroks leapt from his throne, brandishing his metallic claws. "I don't know who you are, but you have 30 seconds before my guards tear you to pieces. Begone! You have no concern for the lost members of your race." The king of the Voroks fell silent. Behind his mask, a smile spread across the small being's face. "Allow me to show you what a millennia in the desert will do to a once proud race." Though no trace of energy was seen in the room, the king of the Voroks immediately felt something force itself into his mind. His vision blurred and the strength left his legs. Within moments his thoughts were filled with images of a subjected version of his people, mindless drones bent to the will of a despot who relied entirely on their strength. The wanton cruelty to their once proud species was laid bare in just an instant. As soon as it began, the force let go of his thoughts and his vision unblurred. What was— he stuttered out, trying to push himself up off the ground where he'd fallen. The small being hobbled closer, placing its cold metallic hand on the king's shoulder. "These events may happen to you, mighty king." The king of the Voroks looked to the being in horror. "I can help you." "Help?" the king muttered. The small being held out a small metal device towards the king's face. Was it in his hand before? The king struggled to remember. "Take these devices and give them to your people," the small being explained. "Devices? What is this?" The king's speech was quiet, incredulous. "These will eliminate any threat that these oppressors would pose to you," the being explained. "I have been monitoring them for 100,000 years, studying their powers, their actions. These machines are the most efficient tool to disable their powers." The king of the Voroks staggered back on his feet, but felt far too weak. The farthest he made it was to his knees. "But why?" he managed to blurt out. "Why are you helping us? What do you have to gain from—" "They will come for you," the being said, speaking directly into the ear of the king. "And when they do, you and your people shall be erased from the surface of Boda Magna." The words echoed through the king's head, the words repeating over and over again in his thoughts. While the king could not feel it happening, the mysterious force had grabbed hold of his mind once again. The throne room faded away into darkness around him, leaving only himself and the small being. For a moment, and only a moment, he thought he could see the being's eyes begin to glow as it began to speak again. "When they come for you, This is what you need to do. A little bit of a footnote at the last bit at the very end. I'll probably end up rewriting this once I actually get here. A shadow cast over the skirmish. Gaelu looked up, his expression changing in an instant to one of terror. The three Toa, noticing something was wrong, glanced in the same direction. In the sky, a gigantic hunk of red metal was hurling directly towards them. "Move!" Gaelu yelled, realizing too late that the object was far too close already to get away from. Orde, Charya, and Zarya followed close behind him as they began to flee from the incoming meteor. As the four of them attempted to escape, the Bodomagnan Voroks began chasing after them, with Kabrua at the front of the pack. They seemed to be ignoring whatever was causing their prey to flee from them. Then, for the Voroks, everything ended in an instant. The Toa facility crumbled effortlessly under the weight of the meteor, slowing it down in no noticeable way. As the colossal mass collided with the surface of Solis Magna, a shockwave rippled through the ground, causing the earth to crack for miles. The Voroks, who were lucky not to be taken by the shockwave, were either pulled into the fissures opening beneath them or were unlucky enough to be hit by falling trees and debris. Even mighty Kabrua was pulled under, not even conscious as he fell into the ever-growing ravine. Meanwhile, Zarya had attempted to steel himself once the object hit, while Gaelu, Orde, and Charya continued running. They'd somehow managed to get a fair distance away in a short time, but it didn't end up being enough. Zarya watched as the other three were tossed into the air, landing with a cacophonous thud and lying still. He could feel the pressure getting through his defenses. It was too much to handle. Once the dust finally began to settle, his consciousness faded. About an hour after the meteor found its new home in a crater on Bara Magna, a small being hobbled its way over to the four bodies lying nearby. It was impressed that they had managed to get far enough away from the impact site to avoid being completely vaporized. After all, he'd found the remains of some Bodomagnan Voroks, which hadn't been as quick, it seemed. Looking to the four collapsed bodies, the being noticed that three of them were Toa. A Toa of lightning, one of iron, and one of psionics. The fourth one was a native, not interesting enough for the being to even acknowledge. He could sense immediately that they were all still alive, if only just barely. To its right were the remains of a building the being was very familiar with. It had witnessed the creation of many Toa like the three before it inside, but now the building lay in cinders, lost forever to time. Feeling his new power brimming within him, the being smirked. The plan he'd been brewing for millennia was finally coming together, and it just so happened that three Toa had practically been gift-wrapped for him. It was as if the stars had aligned. And so far, that is what we have, and as you can probably imagine, quite a bit of effort has been put into it. It's obviously not done yet, but you can get a general idea of the concepts that are being laid out here. So, that being said, if you guys have any opinions or would like to hear more, I'm perfectly willing to come back and do more read-alongs when the next chapters are done. Hell, I could even make serials of it if you're interested enough. A bit more epilogues to Gathered Friends. Anyways, since that's all I really have, and I don't really have Curtis here to end the episode, let us end off by saying to keep an eye out for next week, next 2 weeks. I don't know when this is really going to air, probably directly after the current episode of Gathered Friends, which as of this recording will be book 10. And we're going to have something very special for our true epilogue to the Gathered Friends Season 1. Or just Gathered Friends Season 1. I don't know why I put a "the" there, but Gathered Friends Season 1. It will have a very interesting epilogue, so stay tuned for that. And, yeah, we'll see you then, everyone. Hope you enjoyed.